Hey, it's Craig. I just wanted to let you know that you can listen to Canadian History X early and ad-free on Amazon Music, included with Prime. Greetings and welcome to another episode of Canadian History X. Before I continue, if you want to support the podcast, you can at patreon.com/CanadaX. Every dollar you give helps keep the podcast going. I would also like to give a shout out to one of my favorite podcasts. This is a disaster podcast. Every single week, Peter and Lee come together and relate some of the amazing stories about disasters from the past. And not just natural disasters, musical disasters, viral disasters, disasters just to do with lack of knowledge. It's a wonderful podcast. I've had the pleasure of being on the show twice so far, and I really encourage you to have a listen. And if you have a podcast and you'd like a shout out, just send me an email at craig@canadax.com and I'll see what I can do. Now, with the podcast, I don't want it to just be me relating historical things from 10 years ago, 50, 100, 200, 300 years ago. I also want to talk to people today. This includes experts in their fields, people who have studied parts of Canadian history, and also Canadians who have made their mark in a variety of different ways. And we have some great interviews coming up. But today, we're interviewing one of Canada's greatest figure skaters, Elvis Stojko. Now, as a young man, I was never huge into figure skating, but I did watch it, and I knew who Elvis Stojko was. I remember seeing him in commercials, competing on the world stage, and it was a great honor to be able to talk to him today. So, here's my interview with the legendary Elvis Stojko. Okay, so I guess first question, your parents flee the Soviet invasion in Hungary and come to Canada. You're born, and around 4 you start skating. What kind of leads you towards figure skating?
I was watching TV. I was probably about 2.5 years old, and kept pointing to the TV, watching somebody spinning, and that was something that caught my attention at a very young age. And then my parents, my mom actually didn't take me until I was 4 because she didn't know really where to take me, number one, and number two, they thought, kids are into everything. Will it be a phase? So they went to the neighbor. We used to live in a farm. We had a farm there, and so there wasn't really rinks available close by. So we had to drive about a half an hour, 45 minutes away to get to a rink in Newmarket, Ontario. And my neighbor helped out with that because my parents didn't know where to go, and eventually they took me when I was about 4.5, put me into sort of the beginner skating school, and the rest is history.
And then 6 years old, you win your first trophy. Excuse me. Is that kind of like at that age, kind of like winning a world championship when you get that first trophy?
Yeah, it was a big deal. It was pretty funny because usually, you have the girls skating against the girls, the guys against the guys. There were only 2 boys in the whole club. And it was more like, instead of doing, programs, it was like edge work and figures and things like that. That's the competition that we had. So they put the boys and girls together. And they didn't think a boy would end up winning, but I ended up winning. And I have a little trophy, but it's a little girl on the top of the trophy with my name on it. It's actually pretty funny. So I have a little girl trophy. It's actually pretty funny. I tell the story and I was laughing because there's a lot of girls in the club and 2 boys, and one of the boys ends up winning, which is pretty funny.
Growing up, what skaters did you admire as you progressed through your, your early skating career in your childhood and teens?
Yeah. Well, growing up, there were great skaters. Brian Orster, of course, who ended up training with Brian Boitano, Scotty Hamilton, Alexander Fadea, Joseph Sabobchek. These are all names from like the late 70s, 80s, and then they retired just before the 90s. Of course, Kurt Browning as well, who I ended up jumping and competing up with him, jumping up from junior. He was already world champion, and the next year I jumped up to senior. But I looked up to him as well because it was my novice junior years. I saw him competing, and that was my group of guys that I admired and watched.
So your first kind of taste of going to a major competition, that was 1991, was it? The World Championships?
first World Championships was 1990 in Halifax.
Okay.
Yeah, but I did junior Worlds before that as well. I did 1989 and 1990. I was young enough to, I was senior, but I was young enough to be junior still internationally. So I did a few international competitions as junior. I did junior Worlds 1989 December. And then the next month I made the world team when I competed at Nationals, which was January, and then competed at Worlds 3 months later in March in Halifax. So it was an interesting year because it was at Junior Worlds, and then I jumped up to Senior Worlds within a couple of months.
So was it kind of weird? You started, like you said, you started skating because you saw the people on TV, and then to go to something like the World Championship and be around people that you admired growing up. Was it kind of a weird feeling?
It was exciting because it was a time I was just soaking it all in. I mean, I was competing against Kurt in 1990 at Nationals the first time, and then again at Worlds. Seeing, guys like Victor Petrenko, who, was third at the Calgary Olympics in 1988 that I watched, between the Battle of the Bryans. Then I was, competing against him. A lot of younger guys that were roughly my age that I saw on television that were competing internationally. Todd Eldridge at the time as well. And, Christopher Bowman. These are all names that, I was growing up watching and competing against. And so we were all there. And, of course, Mini Canada, which was exciting. My first World Championship being held in Halifax, which was fantastic. So it was a very exciting time. It was, you make the big time at that point, and it's, it's pretty exciting. You've made a certain level, and then you're looking for more. For me, I was always going for more and more and more because that's just how I am. But it was an exciting time. That was step for my career.
Did you and Kurt Browning kind of have a friendly rivalry just because you guys were competing so much together at these various events?
Yeah, it was always, the guys were always good that way. I mean, it was always friendly rivalry. We loved competing against each other, especially over the years with Kurt and I. That was a big, battle nationally, and then again at Worlds. For us, we would go to compete against the rest of the world. When we were outside of the country, we compete as a team, and then, as competitors in our own country, we would duke it out to see who would win nationals. Internationally as well, I got along with a number of the guys that I competed against. Guys like Todd Eldridge, who were great competitors. Scott Davis, who another American that I competed against. Ilya Kulik, of course, later on. Yagudin and Plashenko, all those guys that competed later on. But I had really good rivalries with a number of skaters over the years. But it was always friendly rivalries that we had. The guys were good that way. We kind of leave it out on the ice, and it was a great time.
What was it? What was it like to win your first gold at World Championship?
My first gold World Championships, 1994. That was a pretty big time because it wasn't only a fight to win, but it was also a fight for my recognition in regards to my style as a skater. It was something that people said I was only a jumper, and it was a really tough thing to kind of break because I was not just the typical figure skater. I had a lot of fans because of that. But I also had a lot of the traditionalists within the sport just didn't like the way I skated or the way that I presented skating and how I went about it. So it was a big deal that year. Fighting it out through the 4 years previous, and then getting close second in '93, and then '94. Going to Canadians, winning Canadians, beating Kurt, going to Olympics, placing second, which was the big, a controversy there, in Lillehammer, and then, going to Worlds and really just putting it down and, competing the best that I could and winning, and that was it was a huge time. It was sort of my mark as a skater, not, technically, but artistically as well, and that was, it was a pretty amazing time.
What was it like in regards to your first national title? You beat Kurt, you beat him in Edmonton, kind of his own home turf. But to win your first national title, what was that like?
Oh, that was a huge thing too. It was a battle with Kurt 90, 91, 92, 93. It was very, very close to 93 in Hamilton. And then in 92, I had an injury. And Kurt couldn't compete at the Nationals, but Michael Slipchuk ended up winning. I had a fractured foot, which was kind of disappointing. 90 and 91, I was still very young, so still sort of green in all of it. So it was sort of my formative years. But finally 94, it was everything came together that year. It was just everything kind of just all the work that I'd done previously had showed up for that season. And Kurt, the year before, it was a really close competition in Hamilton, and that the next year I was really focused on winning that title and going to the Olympics as the number one guy from Canada. That was my goal, and it happened that year. It was a pretty big, I know it was a pretty big upset, especially in Edmonton for him, but it was an incredible time. It was a really incredible time, and I just didn't want. I know that Kurt was retiring, and I wanted to be number one going that year, and hitting that pinnacle really set the tone for Olympics and Worlds. I just kind of rode a high all the way for the next few months.
When did you first start to kind of discover that, people knew who you were? If you're like walking down the street and people are like, well, that's Elvis Stojko. So was it kind of weird to suddenly be well known around Canada?
Yeah, it was that year in 94, I came back from Olympics, and already I had sponsors, knocking at our door. My agent was busy with a whole bunch of stuff. People were, coming to us, and that was pretty crazy. We were already trying to sort out deals with different companies at that point. It was pretty wild. I mean, my parents worked hard. They struggled all the way through to put me through skating, but it wasn't until I actually won that sponsors came to the table. It was very difficult to get sponsorship, and to have become a household name. Not overnight. It was still a process where people knew me in the sport. 90, 91, the fans knew me. 92 was a big year because when I went to Olympics in Albertville, I was the only skater to skate both the short and the long perfectly clean, and I dropped the placing from 6th to 7th. There was a huge upset with that. There was a huge outcry, and Don Cherry, who he went on his coach's corner at the time and talked about me, kind of put me on the map, and people ended up watching more of what I was doing at that time back in 92. So 92 was an interesting year. That kind of was the first year that it kind of started to progress. People got to know who I was. I became more of a household name. 93, it started to build, and then of course it went into 94. It wasn't quite overnight, but that was sort of the first spot of it going, not just nationally, internationally in 92. Jumping on the scene in 1990 was big when I skated so well, and Kurt had a rough go in Sudbury, and that competition was really an interesting one for me. I went from not making nationals the year before, and then making the world team the next year right away. I made nationals, I made the world team, and it was a huge jump. And I jumped on the scene that year, and it was a pretty exciting time. So it was a stepping stone right from there. It wasn't sort of just overnight success. There was little moments of check mark, more people, bigger.
Mm-hmm.
And by the time 94 came around, after Olympics, and that was huge. That was a huge thing. And walking down the street was a little bit different for me.
So in regards to the Olympics with Nagano, so you're the favorite going in, but you're dealing with an injury. There's a flu that's kind of making its way around all the athletes, and you still you're able to come through it with a silver medal. Are you, obviously everybody would like gold, but considering the injury, the flu, all of that. Are you still very proud of getting to that silver?
Yeah, there are moments like it's still for me, being a competitor and as a warrior. It's I am proud of that moment. It's still I look back and it took a number of years for me to kind of just allow it to be what it was. Because you set out, for me, I set out my goal and I'm going to get it. And regardless if I was injured or anything, I never used the cold or the injury to try to be an excuse to stop me from getting what I wanted. And that's what got me through. That got me to the silver. Most like the doctors are saying, we don't know how you did it mentally, how you did it physically. I was just so hell bent on winning and being number one and putting down the best performance I could at the time. I was focused on that. After that, the mental strain and physical strain of it took a toll after the fact. Took a while for me to sort of recover from it all because I sort of overexerted. But looking back on it, I can look back on it happily. It took me a long time before I could actually watch the video of watching my skating. It was really hard for me to watch it, but I can look back and say, wow, it was a pretty amazing time what I went through in order to get that silver, getting 2 silvers at Olympics. Other than Brian, who got 2 silvers as well, individual silvers. It was pretty amazing, and I was pretty happy with that. Now that I can look back now and talk and reminisce about it.
Mm-hmm. Looking at the course of your entire career, what's the moment that stands out above everything?
The moment that stands out about everything. There are a couple of moments. The big year was for me was '94 Olympics. That was a huge one for standing out, and then jumping to Worlds that year, winning Worlds. Back when we had the 6-0 system, I got first place all the way across the short, first place all the way across the long. There was almost no contest. It was just I skated so well, I was so on point, and it was just like effortless effort. I had trained so hard, and everything came together at that point. Another year that was big was '97. That year, I think I'd won every single competition going into '98 as well. I'd done the first quad triple at competition, the first one to do it at Worlds. That was a huge year for me as well. So there's a couple of moments that was really big for me that really stand out. They stand out for different reasons for me. Those are the big ones.
Do you feel like Canada does a good job of celebrating its figure skaters? I mean, in other countries, they might kind of know who the figure skaters are, but it seems in Canada, we really kind of get behind our figure skaters. I'm sure that most Canadians can probably name at least 5 to 10, versus in other places where they maybe have trouble naming 1 or 2. Why do you feel like we are so into figure skating and celebrate the athletes who compete?
Yeah, we've had a number of really great skaters over the years. I mean, that people can remember, and we've had great legacy. Obviously being Northern country, Winter Olympics, that's a huge thing. Hockey is a huge thing for us, of course, and figure skating kind of ties in with that, being an ice sport. But I think because of the legacy of the people that we've had before us, there's Barbara Ann Scott, who won back in geez, it was the 30s, 40s, 30s, I think it was. Don Jackson, who's a staple for me. I mean, that's another person that he came when I was a young kid in Newmarket. He came to the seminar there and worked with me a little bit. Back in the 70s and late 70s, he came and worked with me, and that was a moment for me that was huge. But he did the first triple Lutz back in '62. You had Vern Taylor do the first triple axel, I think, in '77. and we've had just great champions and people that have done really well internationally. And when they do well internationally over the years, it'll bring attention to the sport itself. But we've had such great skaters, not just the men. We've had the women, Karen Magnuson, Otto and Marie Jelinek as well. We've had great, pairs and ladies and men's over the years that have really brought attention to, figure skating in Canada. Brian was a huge one for us in the 80s. That was a massive jump as well for attention. And, when media and technology was changing, people could watch it a little bit easier. That also was huge for us. And I think we just, we celebrate our athletes in figure skating so well. And I kind of just lived off of that, into the 90s. Both Kurt and I kind of, were able to take that into the next generation of skaters. And, that was amazing for us in 2018 in Korea when our team won gold there. And, of course, Tess and Scott, that, we've had great champions over the years, and that keeps continuing. And I think it's because of that. It's the legacy, I think, that, started with, Barbara and Scott. That was where it all started with that, and brings attention to Canada. It's great.
And I guess my last question is, what advice do you have for young skaters who are just starting to get into their career?
Yeah, there's it's a big choice on what you want to do with it. Do you want to be a recreational skater, something that's just for you? You're not really into competing, or if you really want to go for it and do something with the sport, with regards to competition. Going to the Olympics is don't, sell yourself short. Really, it's all about your willpower, and setting your goals. No matter what, you just keep going after, what you want. And, that is something that you've got to be possessed in a way. Every morning I would wake up and I would check my body, see how my body felt. That was a routine that I went through every day mentally to prep. And the mental set is the most important part of it, because the mental part pulls you through those very difficult times. It's what inspires your body to push harder, push farther. That's you can only go so far as your mind will let you go. Even if the body, if you're a little bit tired, the brain can kick in. Regardless, even with injury, you don't want to push hard during that time. But even for me, when I was competing at the Olympics, in '98, I asked the doctors, will I damage it further? Will it be a problem? They said, no, you just have to deal with the pain. If you do this for the next 6 months, yeah, you will have, a lingering injury. So I knew that I couldn't damage it further. So it was a risk, but it was a calculated risk. I made asked all the right questions to make sure that I wouldn't ruin my career for further. But, it was the mental part of my training that really got me through it. It wasn't the physical part. The physical, by that point, it's basically 5% physical at that point. It's all the mental attitude. So it's the attitude towards what you want, the willpower towards what you want, and make a habit every day. I did a lot of self-talk as well, growing up. Be very, very clear in what you want, and don't let anyone stop you. Getting towards it. And there will be obstacles, no matter what. People, injuries, circumstances, but there's always a way to get through it, and the mental side is how you do it.
I hope you enjoyed that interview, and if you did, please give us a rating and review. Helps keep us up near the top of the various rankings. You can email me any questions you have at craig@canadax.com. You can visit my website and the hundreds of articles on Canada's history that I've written there. Just go to canadax.com. And again, you can support the podcast by going to Patreon at patreon.com/CanadaX. Thanks, and we'll see you again next time.